Hello everyone, this is Tom Stanley, State Representative for Waltham and Lexington, and soon to be the town of Lincoln. Today we're here in my State House office with the President of the Massachusetts Taxpayers Association, Michael Widmer. Thank you very much for coming today.
Sure, my pleasure, Tom. Nice to join you.
Thank you. We had an interview about 10 years ago on my cable show.
Yes, well, a bit younger then, but
Right.
we're still at it.
Same here. This year, you're celebrating your 20th year as president of the Mass Taxpayers Association this year?
Yeah, that's correct. I never thought I'd be doing it this
Yeah.
long, but I love it, and I enjoy both the research we do, the independent work we provide and
Right.
resource, and I love the politics too. So,
Well, the organization and you in particular have tremendous credibility on Beacon Hill on both sides of the aisle. Your reports come out, they're very timely. Issues that we're talking about or need to talk about. They're accurate and objective, which is very important. It's to have that independent analysis done. Now, the rest of your other adult career, you served in two administrations, going
Yep.
back to the Sargent administration
Republican and then
and Dukakis administration.
Democrat, yes.
And they're both senior level positions back in the late 70s and then 80s.
yeah,
Right.
well, mostly in the 70s.
The
Yep,
70s
yep,
as well? Okay.
Yes,
You were Assistant Secretary of Human Services,
yes, in the Sargent administration. Yeah.
right? And then also the Governor Dukakis, Director of Communications.
Yep, for the last 3 years of his first term.
And then Deputy
70s.
Chief Secretary.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
So,
So, that was a very, interesting experience. When you work in a governor's office, you understand just how intense it is and the demands on one's time and everybody pulling one way or another
Right.
in crises. So I can't imagine what it's like to work for a president if it was as
I know.
crazy as it was working in a governor's office. So.
and I always admire what the candidates go through and their families running for national office. It's just amazing. I'm a Democrat, but just look at Governor Romney, a Republican. He's been running for 8 years now.
Yes, he has.
So
He started as governor here. Yeah.
Right, so that's quite a long time. But before that, you were even a reporter.
I worked at 4 years as reporter at United Press International when it was alive, and
We have typewriters then? or-
well, virtually it was yes before the internet and
Yeah.
computers. So
Right.
it was quite, but it was a terrific job because the kind of pressure there, the deadlines.
Yeah.
Rest of my career, I haven't worried about deadlines after that experience.
Well,
So it was good.
unfortunately, my career goes well before the internet, so I can't needle you on that one.
Right. Well.
And your educational background, graduated from Princeton University, and then also have a master's degree and PhD in political science, I believe, from Harvard University.
Yes, public policy and politics and government and history, economics has really been my career.
Yeah.
And both as an undergraduate and graduate, and then basically throughout my career, it's been.
And
I love.
And you've often been on local radio stations and TV stations.
Yes, I get interviewed a lot. Press, print media, radio, television. As the independent, as head of the foundation, and the independent commentator on state issues, fiscal
Right.
and other issues, healthcare, transportation, and so forth. We try to, as you said, produce unbiased, factually based information.
Right.
And obviously in politics there's a lot of spin, and we try to be the truth tellers,
Right.
and never making it personal, but
Right.
just the issues. And so I
Even
think
when sometimes the arrows come your way.
they may come my way, and I
Yeah.
try to not take it personally,
Right.
because it's, as I say, it's a long season, and somebody who's shooting at you one day is praising you the next
Right,
because of
right.
your position on some other issue.
Right.
So,
Sounds like some constituents I know. But anyway.
well, as well, I think in politics you see that, yes,
Right.
of course, all the time.
The Taxpayers Foundation itself, I think this is it the 80th year
Yeah,
this year?
80 years. It's
80
really
years.
rather remarkable. And I think what started under my predecessor, there have only been 4 heads of the organization in the 80 years. And my predecessor, Dick Manley, was the one who really began to turn it to the research analytical foundation of the foundation and give it more substance. And then I've tried to carry that forward. So,
Yeah. Do you know what it was when it started?
Well, initially a group of bankers were founded it in the early 30s, and I think presumably concerned that the Irish were taking over the place, so to speak, and
Right.
Which is kind of amusing.
Right.
And so they wanted, and I think there it was more of an anti-tax.
So the old Yankee bankers
Yes,
started.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I think then it was more of an anti-tax organization,
Yeah.
and as I say, it's changed over the years, so it's really
Right.
focused. I mean, we've been supportive of tax increases and
Right.
and against tax decreases. We opposed the ballot questions in 2008 and 10, which would have one repeal the income tax, the other cut the sales tax, because I think in the end, we believe that there needs to be a balanced approach to state
Right.
finances, and you need to have enough revenues to invest in education, healthcare, cities and towns, local schools, and so forth.
And on the point you just made, this organization is not to be confused with the Mass Taxpayers Association.
With the Citizens for Limited
Citizens, right.
Taxation,
That's
right.
right.
Yes, exactly, and sometimes we do, because that CLT is a pure sort of anti-tax,
Right.
anti-government organization. We're not.
This is more analysis to have good information to help decision makers make
Yes.
good decisions for the betterment of the Commonwealth moving forward.
Exactly.
Right. And basically, in your mission, I'll just read it here, that the mission is to provide accurate, unbiased research with balanced, thoughtful recommendations that strengthen the state's finances and economy in order to foster the long-term well-being of the Commonwealth.
That's what we try to do.
That says it all. Now, the organization, well, first of all, you've won 16, in the last 10 years, 16 national awards.
Yeah, I'm very proud of it. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention, nor necessarily should it,
Right.
but there's a national organization called the Governmental Research Association, which gives awards there's sort of three categories of awards for state organizations like ours around the country. And in the last 16, 17 years, we've won 16 national awards.
Wow.
And they only give 3 a year to state organizations. So I think that's been something I'm very proud
Right.
of. And
Right
really,
up there with the Boston Celtics.
Yes, yeah, right. But what it speaks to, I think, is the quality of the work we
Right,
do, judged
right.
by peers across the country.
And your board of directors, just to give people a full
Sure.
understanding, it's made up of a lot of representatives from business?
Yes, yeah. We are supported. We have about an annual budget, a lean organization, about $1 million budget. And we're supported by employers through annual membership support. That's our principal
Right.
revenue source. And then they're represented on the Board of Trustees and the Executive Committee. Not all members, but
Right.
a subset of the members.
And if you can just maybe talk a little bit in general about what your organization does in terms of, like, there's annual reports and there's more short-term or bulletins that you publish as well.
Our bread and butter is to focus on state and local finances. How are we doing with the state budget, working its way through the process, the governor, the House, the Senate, the conference committee, final budget, maybe vetoes, and we try to track that and give some analysis of what's happening and the numbers themselves. So on our website, and people can look and see, okay, how much is spending on the Department of Corrections growing, or, for example, or any other agency. So that's our bread and butter. And then we look at a number of issues. They've changed from year to year in part depending on what the agenda of the legislature and the governor are, because
Right.
obviously we're trying to focus on topical issues.
Right.
Transportation has been a major priority for the foundation for 15, 16 years, and healthcare has as well. We were very much involved in the healthcare reform of 2006, and then the more recent legislation that you
Maybe,
passed.
why don't we
earlier
touch,
this year.
if you don't mind elaborating a little bit on the healthcare aspects and what your organization provided to the legislature and to the public?
Sure. I think on the health reform, there were two aspects. This was back in 2005 and 2006 when it was being considered by the legislature. And of course, Romney was governor, and
Ted Kennedy was senator.
Kennedy was working from Washington closely with Romney, and then of course the House Speaker and the Senate President. Our role was twofold. One is that we were looking at the employer piece, and we felt there did need to be an employer responsibility, shared responsibility as part of the reform, but we opposed the payroll tax aspect, which had been put forward by the then House Speaker Sal DeMacy. The other element was, how much is this going to cost taxpayers? How much is this going to cost out of the state budget? So we did some analysis on that. And I think it was reassuring to legislators that it was not going to break the bank. That's turned out to be the case. We've done 2 reports over the years, over the last several years, most recently earlier this year, which have documented the fact that it's cost about 1% more from the state budget. But
And many more people were able to be covered.
Yes, many more covered. Employers have covered more people. Federal government has paid more money to the state. We took some money we already had in the state budget and reallocated it. So the additional money is about 100 million new state dollars each year of the 5 years. And that's manageable in a $32 billion budget. So
And more recently, you've done some work with the cost aspect.
Right. The legislation, there were Senate and House proposals, a lot of different ideas. The final legislation is very sweeping, but there were proposals that put forward that we felt would undercut the crown jewel of the Massachusetts economy, the healthcare system, and particularly the whole life sciences and medical device sectors, which comes out of the first-class medical schools and universities and venture capital and so forth, saying, yes, we need to control the rate of growth of health costs, but we can't sacrifice our economic future in doing that.
All the jobs and, people are paying for their homes and sending their kids to school and so forth and buying products.
So we have argued for trying to bring a balanced approach. Now in the implementation, which is just about to begin, the law takes effect on November 5, I think it is. And therefore, there's going to be implemented, and it's very elaborate. So we'll be monitoring that. We can't monitor the entire thing. I think there are 99 separate regulations that are required by the new law, but we'll try to focus on some of the important pieces, like what's the benchmark target for cost growth that is established each year, and that kind of thing. We'll be monitoring and offering our opinions.
But it's important to have your watchdog type organization and others, along with the media, to do this type of work. Because obviously if people get invested in some big initiative that's passed, they want to make sure it's successful. And, having those extra eyes watching to see if, like we've done with healthcare, tweaking, changing things in order to sustain, the overall program. It's important to have those extra independent watchdog eyes watching us.
We try to bring a constructive approach to that. I agree with that in principle for sure. I think, I've been in government and outside, and certainly I understand the reality of when you're pushing an issue, you want to, you care about it and you believe in it. But there may be consequences or aspects to it that
and some unforeseen.
Yeah, so having an independent set of eyes, I think, is important. We try to do it constructively toward achieving an objective. We don't want to be in a position of, unless we have to, of just saying no, don't do that.
Right. Now, the other one of the other big issues in the last at least 10 years and moving forward, something that the state and the legislature has to deal with, is the Mbta fiscal situation. And, we did pass a stopgap measure this past session, and we need to address the long-term solution. And I know your organization did a lot of work, and you were on a special commission a few years ago that was involved with identifying what the state needs to do, and perhaps you could talk about that and the steps you see coming forward soon.
Well, it's a very important issue and a complicated issue. First thing, the MBTA is obviously an economic lifeline for our region, and so people outside the region, I understand, resent the money that goes toward it from the state budget, but it's a key part of our economy in this state and gets 1 million people into work each day, including myself, I might add. So I see the travails and live them. The basic problem is that the MBTA's cost structure is such that expenses are growing faster than revenues each year. Well, that's not sustainable, whether it's for an individual or family, unless somebody's independently wealthy.
Right.
So the question is, how do you how do you contain the costs on the one hand? And a lot of those are like healthcare costs and pension costs and so forth.
And we've done some things.
And
in the last few
absolutely, the
years.
legislature, important reform, Transportation Reform 2009, which addressed that in part, and that's been important. The other part of it is we need an ongoing revenue stream and increases in revenue from time to time.
And the sales tax, the extra penny that we added, dedicated to the transportation system, was a big help. But then when the recession came, that went straight down, right?
So that
we
was
lost a lot
only
of revenue.
that only helped over the short term.
Right.
Relatively. Yes, they get $160 million a year approximately from, the sales tax was at the beginning, and then the extra $160 million out of the increase in the sales tax a couple of years ago. And then the Band-Aid, if you will, another $50 million earlier this year. So the state has stepped up, and obviously we can't do this as a Commonwealth indefinitely. We don't have enough money. So that's why the cost side has to be addressed.
Right.
But it's also only fair when we look at transportation funding, which will be, and reform, which will be on the agenda, I think, in 2013, that we also make sure that we do this in a balanced statewide way so that money for the regional transit authorities across the state, for highways and bridges across the state, also get a piece of this.
Right.
It can't just be an MBTA bailout. So this is going to be very difficult fiscal and political
Decisions to come.
that will come in 2013, but it needs to be addressed because we can't afford to have the T go under, so to speak, or just cut service so it's...
Right, regardless of how we got there.
Right.
We have to have, transportation system to so many people in Waltham and, all Eastern Mass and really across the state, but rely on public transportation. You go to the doctors, just go to school, go to work.
It's critical.
It is.
And we have, so everybody's going to have to share in that.
Right.
Fare increases, maybe every 3 years, are going to have to be part of it, but we can't just do it with fare increases. That's not fair.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the revenue projections moving forward, and then if we have time, we can perhaps go back to some of the other reports, more recent reports that the organization has worked on. I know Secretary of State of Administration and Finance, Gonzalez, just recently came out and said that revenue projections are $95 million short of what everyone collectively projected, even though it's still above what we brought in the first 3 months last fiscal year.
Right.
It's less than we anticipated. So we have that issue, and then we also have possibly, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, that possibly the income tax rate may drop by law from 5.25 to 5.2, and that would affect revenue for the second half of the fiscal year.
Yes.
So maybe those two things and anything else that...
Sure. Well, the problem facing the state this fiscal year is that the economy has slowed down. And so we, the nation and Massachusetts, we're seeing some job growth for 12 to 18 months coming out of this awful Great Recession, but not great job growth, but at least growing. Now it's pretty much level, so we're seeing ups and downs from month to month. So that's obviously a problem for trying to find work, for individuals finding jobs, but also that means money coming into the state treasury at less of a rate, because obviously the main source of revenue for the state is the personal income tax and the sales tax, so jobs and people spending money.
Right.
So we're seeing a slowdown, so yes, we're 100 million short of our benchmark for the first 3 months. So the Secretary Gonzalez said, well, I'm not going to make an official change in the forecast, but I'm going to start to take action.
As if we
As
were.
if we're going to have to. So he's beginning to squeeze state spending, telling agencies they're on notice that we may have to squeeze further.
No additional positions to be created.
Exactly. You're gonna
a cap on positions and a
And-
couple of other changes I think he's announced.
Yeah, so he's going to really essentially tighten
Right.
spending.
Right.
Um,
And actually, and he asked them to already start to formulate budget cutting plans if, in fact,
It gets worse.
different events
Right.
were to come about. And what are some of those things that you might be concerned about for us? The overall world economy, what's
Yeah.
going on in Europe,
exactly.
potentially Iran.
Sure. I mean, all of the uncertainties on the downside, sometimes there are risks. I mean, there are uncertainties that things may get better.
Right.
Not very many economists are predicting anything's going to get better soon. We're just trying to stay out of another recession. I mean, got all the problems in Europe, and then the global economy and Iran. Yeah, God help us if we
Right.
have a major war in Iran. I mean, that'll affect the whole Middle East and oil, and that'll probably send us in a recession. So, and then, of course, what's going to happen in Washington, well, the election, but then more importantly, the whole issue of the so-called fiscal cliff,
Right.
cuts in Washington and whatnot. I mean, and that's a very dangerous
Whatever
situation.
party wins, they have to start addressing this.
Yes.
I mean,
No question.
you cannot keep kicking the can down the road. We have to start addressing our annual deficit that keeps climbing.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
The problem is, how are we going to do it, and what's going to be the impact on the national economy?
Right.
So do we do this in a balanced, staged way that at least keeps us it begins to address the deficit, but doesn't send us into a recession, or do we overreach and not get agreement on a balanced effort, and then probably would send us into another recession?
Yeah.
So there are some very serious issues that national and global issues, and they would have an impact on all the states, certainly including Massachusetts.
Yeah, certainly when the economy goes bad in Massachusetts, we rely, one of the tax revenue areas is capital gains tax.
Yes.
And, that when that goes, it goes quick.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly what happened in 2009.
Right.
We lost more than $1 billion of revenues.
And I think the last time you were on my show, back in like the early 2000s, same thing was happening.
Same thing happened.
Right.
The internet boom and then collapse.
Yeah.
And
Have you given any kind of, it all affects how much money we'll have to take care of the problems that we have here in Massachusetts, whether it's providing safe roads, public safety, education, so forth. The approach America took versus the approach, the European Union in terms of this global recession, we've sort of, spent our way out of it, not sort of, but trying to spend our way, get the economy moving, and in a lot of areas in Europe, they've tried to tackle their more severe debt burden. Is there any pros and cons on either approach, or do you think one's working better than the other? Or?
Well, I certainly think, putting aside the politics, if one can, at this
Right.
very political season, I think the steps that the U.S. took when we were headed really over the cliff, I mean, I don't know that people understand how bad it
Right.
could have been. Could have been at least as bad as the
So
Depression.
we had to spend the money that
Yes, oh, absolutely, we had to do that.
we
and-
might have been in deep depression, but
Right.
having done that, it's time to tighten the belt.
Now we
moving
have
forward.
to deal with the debt,
Right.
the deficit, the national debt. But yeah, I think that the steps that the U.S. took were very important and saved an utter disaster.
Right.
And we've been adding jobs now, but now we do have to, and the next president and Congress are going to have to
Right.
wrestle with this, and it's going to have consequences.
And they're going to have to work together.
They're going to, one hopes. I mean, there used to be an era where that happened.
Right.
So, I think the U.S. is in a pretty good position relative to where we were. And I'm not saying, I'm not taking sides on the
story's
political
not over,
debate.
though.
I'm just,
Right.
the story's not over. I just mean in terms of, from an economic
Right.
point of view. Should also say Massachusetts, for all of our challenges, is in better shape than most states.
Right, right.
And we've handled, you, the legislators, and the governor have
Made tough
handled this.
decisions when we had to, and
Yeah,
kept a healthy rainy day fund.
Yes.
To be able to make the avert a lot of other tough decisions. And
I mean, a lot
And
of
it-
tough decisions, but the rest of the, California, Rhode Island,
Right.
Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Florida, they're all in much more serious
right.
shape.
And the reason I bring it all up, obviously, is it affects the state's revenue. It also affects the city of Waltham's revenue and every other 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. Waltham relies a lot on state assistance.
Sure.
And also federal assistance. But also, when the economy's bad, people aren't paying their excise taxes or their property taxes and so forth. So it's all related, and it's all related to providing essential services.
I don't think the public, enough of the public doesn't realize that there's not a lot of waste in government. Of course, there are places
Right.
and some, but when you look at a $32 billion
Right.
state budget or budgets of the Walthams, Lexingtons of the world, I mean, those are going to services by and large.
Right.
Services that the public wants. We're talking about local schools, public safety, libraries, sweeping the streets and
Right.
cleaning them in the winter.
Exactly.
I mean, this is, or human services if you have, people who need disabled, higher education, and so on and so forth. These are all basic services that the public expects us to provide.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. So
Well, it's been a
I want to, it's been a great pleasure, and I thank you for coming on my show again. 10 years ago it was called Commonwealth Concerns. Now it's the Stanley Report. I have a monthly electronic newsletter. That's the Stanley Report. We try to keep the citizens informed of what's happening, mostly on Beacon Hill and how it affects Waltham and Lexington and Lincoln. And we also have this cable show. So again, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll have you on in a few years and we'll talk about how great things are.
Thank you, Tom, for having me. I appreciate it, and keep up your good work.
Thank you. Yep.